Charlie, we're securing your crew ID and phone now.
Is this about the cash from the Dominican route?
Charlie Hernandez operated as a flight attendant on international routes for 6 years, walking millions of dollars in drug money through a dedicated security lane that no one ever stopped him at. By the time investigators closed in, he had moved at least $2.5 million through JFK and recruited someone else to help him do it.
It involves the cash shipments, the KCM lane, and the cooperating witness.
Then I want a lawyer before I say anything else.
There would be no explanation that mattered now. Federal agents had spent more than 2 years building the case in front of him, and every word he said in that hallway was being recorded. $2.5 million in narcotics proceeds, 6 years of flights, $121,000 in marked sting cash, and a security lane at John F. Kennedy International Airport that was supposed to make American aviation faster, not move drug money to Santo Domingo. His name was Charlie Hernandez. He was 42 years old, a Dominican-American flight attendant from West New York, New Jersey. And by the time Homeland Security investigations finished walking him through what they already had on him, he understood exactly why they had bothered to bring 4 agents. Quick question before we go any further. How many security checkpoints do you think you pass through in a major American airport without ever realizing they exist? There are layers of access most travelers never see, and entire lanes designed for people whose uniforms make them invisible. Drop a comment if you have ever wondered who gets to skip the line and why. And subscribe if you are new here. We cover the cases other channels will not touch. Charlie Hernandez was born in 1982 in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. His family emigrated to the United States when he was 7 years old, settling first in Washington Heights, the densely packed Dominican neighborhood in northern Manhattan, where Spanish was the working language on every block and every corner, bodega-stocked Goya products by the case. His father drove a livery cab 6 days a week and slept on the 7th. His mother worked the breakfast shift at a coffee shop on Broadway near 181st Street, then took a second shift cleaning offices in Midtown 3 nights a week. The family lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a 6-story walk-up where the heat worked when the landlord felt like it, and the kitchen window looked out over a fire escape and an alley full of black trash bags. He attended public school in District 6 and then George Washington High School on Audubon Avenue. He was not a remarkable student. Teachers described him in evaluations as personable, well-liked by peers, and easily distracted but cooperative. He graduated in 2000 with a regular diploma and no plan beyond it. He worked for a year at a clothing store on 181st Street selling jeans and basketball sneakers to neighborhood kids on layaway. Then took a job as a baggage handler with a ground services contractor at LaGuardia Airport. The pay was $11 an hour. The shifts started at 4 in the morning. The work tore up his back and his hands and his sleep schedule. But the airport became a world he understood, and he liked the rhythm of it. He liked the announcements over the gate intercoms. He liked watching the aircraft push back from the jet bridge in the cold. He liked the idea of being inside something larger than the block he grew up on. In 2005, he applied to a flight attendant training program with a major international carrier operating routes between New York and Latin America. He was 23 years old. He passed the interview process on his second attempt. His Spanish was fluent, which mattered for the Latin American routes, and his customer service demeanor was natural. The training academy in Miami ran 6 weeks. He learned the door arming procedures on a 737 mock-up. He learned the evacuation commands in 2 languages. He learned to recite the safety briefing without looking at the script. He learned how to manage a panicking passenger, a turbulent meal service, and a galley fire. His final evaluation graded him above standard on passenger interaction and satisfactory on technical procedures. He pinned his wings on in a ceremony at the academy in late 2005. His mother flew down for it. She cried in the front row. His first base assignment was JFK. He moved out of his parents' apartment and into a 1-bedroom in West New York, New Jersey, a Hispanic-majority town across the Hudson River from Midtown Manhattan, with a view of the skyline from the bluffs along Boulevard East. The rent was $1,100 a month. The commute to JFK was an hour by train and bus on a good day, 90 minutes on a bad one. He worked the New York to Santo Domingo route constantly during his first 3 years on the line, and the New York to Punta Cana route in the high season. He was good at the job. He remembered passengers' names. He poured drinks with one hand while balancing a tray with the other. He calmed crying children in Spanish. He earned solid performance reviews. By 2010, he was clearing $58,000 a year with overtime, which in West New York was enough to live decently and send money home to relatives in Santo Domingo every month. He had family in both countries, cousins in the Bronx, an aunt in Santo Domingo, a younger brother who had stayed in the Dominican Republic and worked construction. He flew that brother's wedding route in 2011 and walked his sister-in-law down a beach in Boca Chica. He was the cool uncle to a half-dozen nieces and nephews on both sides of the ocean. He bought them sneakers from the Nike store in Times Square and carried the boxes through customs on his return legs. He was, by every account from the people who knew him before any of this happened, an easy man to like. But there was something else too. He moved between two countries every week. He understood the friction of that movement. He understood what it meant to need to send money home and to watch the wire transfer fees eat into every dollar. He understood that for many Dominican families on both sides of the route, cash was the only currency that actually worked, and that the systems built to monitor cash were systems built for someone else's life, not theirs. That understanding by itself was not criminal, but it was the soil, and the seed that would land in it was already on its way. The Known Crew Member Program, abbreviated KCM, was launched in 2011 as a joint initiative between the Transportation Security Administration and the airline industry's largest trade association. The premise was operational efficiency. Every day, hundreds of thousands of credentialed flight crew members move through major American airports on their way to and from aircraft, forcing every one of them through the standard passenger security checkpoint, the same checkpoint that screens every leisure traveler, business traveler, and family of four, created enormous bottlenecks. It also created friction with employees who were, in the TSA's risk assessment, already among the most thoroughly vetted civilians in the country. Flight attendants passed background checks. They were fingerprinted. They were known to the federal government by name, employer, and credential number every single time they boarded a flight, so the agency built them their own door. The KCM lane was a dedicated checkpoint at participating airports, including John F. Kennedy International. A flight attendant in uniform, with a valid KCM credential, scanned a barcode at a reader, presented identification to a TSA officer who confirmed the credential against an active employee database in real time, and walked through. There was no full-body scanner. There was no X-ray belt for shoes and laptops. There was no removal of liquids or laptops or jackets. The lane was designed for speed, and it delivered speed. A crew member could clear KCM in under 30 seconds on a good morning. The standard passenger lane at JFK in the summer of 2015 could take 45 minutes. The architecture worked because of trust. The TSA was not relying on the absence of contraband on the crew member's person. It was relying on the assumption that the crew member, having been vetted by the airline and the federal government, and identifiable down to the badge number, would not carry contraband through the lane in the first place. The credential was the screening. The integrity of the person holding the credential was the security. That assumption held for years because the overwhelming majority of flight attendants are exactly what they appear to be. Working professionals on their way to a 14-hour international turn, carrying a roller bag full of uniform pieces and snacks, and the same paperback they have been trying to finish for 3 months. The KCM program was not naive. It was a calculation, and inside that calculation, there was a vulnerability that any thoughtful person could see if they looked at it long enough. A flight attendant could walk a roller bag full of anything through that lane, and as long as the credential scanned green, no one would open the bag. Charlie Hernandez had looked at that lane every single workday for 9 years before anyone offered him a reason to think about it differently. The introduction happened in 2014, in a way that Hernandez would later describe to investigators with the kind of casual specificity that suggested he had told the story to himself 100 times. A cousin of a cousin at a baptism in Washington Heights mentioned to him over a plate of pernil and rice that he knew people in the city who needed help moving money to family in Santo Domingo. The fee, the cousin said, was good. The work was simple. Hernandez would later tell agents that he had said no at first, that he had thought about it for several months, that he had asked himself whether the people involved were the kind of people he wanted to know. He met with them in February of 2014. The meeting was at a restaurant on Dyckman Street in Upper Manhattan. The men he met with did not identify their organization. They explained in Spanish that they had a steady volume of cash that needed to travel south. They did not say the word narcotics. They did not need to. Hernandez understood. He asked the fee. They told him $1,000 to $2,000 per 60,000 smuggled, paid in cash on completion, with the larger fee available for larger volumes. They told him that if he was reliable, the work would be reliable. His first run was in March of 2014. $60,000 in tightly bundled $100 bills, vacuum sealed in 2 plastic pouches and tucked into the bottom of his standard crew roller bag underneath his uniform shirts and a pair of off-duty sneakers. He met the courier in a parking lot near the Cross Bronx Expressway at 4 in the morning. He drove from there to the long-term lot at JFK. He pulled his bag from the trunk. He walked through the employee entrance and into the terminal. He passed his KCM credential at the lane reader. The light went green. He walked through. The TSA officer at the lane glanced at his identification, nodded, and waved him on. His hands were not shaking. He would tell agents, years later, that he remembered being surprised by that. He had expected to feel something. He felt nothing. He boarded his flight. He worked the cabin. He served drinks and collected trash and read the safety briefing in 2 languages. At Las Americas International Airport in Santo Domingo, after his crew cleared customs through the diplomatic lane reserved for working crew, he walked to a designated pickup point in the lot and handed the bag to a man he had never seen before. The man counted the bills in a hotel room at a property near the airport while Hernandez waited. The man handed him an envelope. The envelope contained $2,000. Hernandez folded it into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket and walked back to his crew transport van. He flew home the next day on his deadhead leg. The second run was a month later. Then they began to cluster. By the end of 2014, he had moved approximately $300,000. By the end of 2015, he had moved nearly $600,000. The pattern stabilized at roughly 1 shipment per month, sometimes 2 in heavy months, with the per-shipment volume increasing as the organization came to trust him. He moved $100,000 at a time by 2016. He moved $120,000 by 2017. The KCM lane never registered a hesitation. The credential always scanned green. The roller bag was never opened, not once, not by a TSA officer, not by a supervisor, not by a randomized secondary screening protocol. 70 times across 6 years, the same lane, the same nod, the same green light. He spent the money carefully. He did not buy a new car. He did not move out of his rent-stabilized 1-bedroom in West New York. He did not show up to work in jewelry his colleagues had not seen on him before. He sent money home to Santo Domingo. He paid down debts he had carried since his early 20s. He bought his mother a small condo in a building on 188th Street and put the deed in her name. He invested some of it in a small interest in a bar his cousin operated in Washington Heights. He told no one in his life what he was doing. He told no one at his airline. He told no one in his family. The discipline of the silence was, in retrospect, the most impressive part of the operation. In late 2018, the organization asked him whether he knew any other flight attendants on his line. He understood the question. He thought about it for 2 weeks. He approached a colleague named Sarah Valerio Pujols, a flight attendant of approximately his own age who worked the same Caribbean routes and whom he trusted enough to begin the conversation. He brought her into the scheme in early 2019. She agreed. She made several runs. He continued to make his own. The volume he had moved by the time the operation reached its endpoint stood, by the federal indictment's later calculation, at approximately $2.5 million, exclusive of the additional cash moved through Pujols on his recruitment. No one at the airline noticed. No one at TSA noticed. No internal audit caught it. No fellow crew member called it in. Hernandez walked through the KCM lane at JFK approximately 70 times across 6 years, carrying narcotics trafficking proceeds in his roller bag, and the architecture of American aviation security greeted him at every single checkpoint with a green light. In October of 2021, the man who would be identified in federal court documents as cooperating witness 1 was arrested by Homeland Security investigations agents in New York City. CW1 was, according to the later complaint, the operational head of the New York-based money laundering organization that had recruited Hernandez 7 years earlier. The arrest happened in the early morning hours at a residence in Queens. CW1 was taken into federal custody, presented with the volume of evidence the El Dorado Task Force had assembled against him, and offered the standard inducement available to cooperators in federal money laundering cases: substantial sentence reduction in exchange for substantial cooperation. CW1 agreed within 72 hours. He sat down with HSI special agents and assistant United States attorneys from the SDNY's Illicit Finance and Money Laundering Unit. Over a period of weeks, he walked them through the entire architecture of the organization he had built. He named the suppliers. He named the cash-out operatives in Santo Domingo. He named the couriers. He named Charlie Hernandez. He named Sarah Valerio Pujols. He named the 2 other flight attendants on his network. He explained the KCM lane. He explained the per-shipment fees. He explained the geography of the handoffs in New York and the geography of the cash drops in the Dominican Republic. He produced his own records, which were neither paper nor digital in any conventional sense, but which his memory had retained with the precision of a man who had run the business for years. Hernandez did not know any of this. He continued to live his life. He continued to work the JFK to Santo Domingo route. He continued to walk through the KCM lane with his credential. He did not change his pattern. He had no reason to. The organization that had arrested its operational head did not communicate the development to the couriers, and CW1, by the terms of his cooperation, did not communicate it either. The investigators wanted the conduct to continue. They wanted to see Hernandez make additional runs while they watched. The investigation, from October 2021 forward, was a controlled observation of a man who did not know he was being observed. For 2.5 years, federal agents tracked Hernandez's movements. They confirmed his pattern. They confirmed his shipments through cooperating informants on the New York end of the operation. They were not building a case that would depend on a single witness or a single shipment. They were building a case that would be airtight by the time it reached a federal indictment. We are about to get into the part of this story where the federal government stops watching and starts moving. If you want to see how these investigations actually work, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We break down the architecture of every case we cover. The next part is where the trap closes, and it closes with a $121,000 handshake. The sting operation came together over a period of months in late 2023 and early 2024. HSI agents, working with CW1 and with an undercover agent posing as a member of the Cooperators organization, set up a controlled cash delivery. The cash was real United States currency, drawn from federal seizure funds and serialized for tracking. The amount was $121,215. The handoff was scheduled at a location in New York City that Hernandez had used before. The cover story was consistent with every previous shipment Hernandez had run. There was no reason, from his perspective, to suspect anything. He accepted the cash. He counted a representative sample. He nodded at the courier. He drove the cash to a meeting with Sarah Valerio Pujols at a location in northern New Jersey, where they split the volume between them according to the operational pattern they had developed. Hernandez took the larger portion, approximately $60,000, with the remaining $61,215 going to Pujols for her own scheduled flight. He drove to the long-term lot at JFK at approximately 4 in the morning on the date of his scheduled flight. He pulled his roller bag from the trunk. He walked through the employee entrance. He approached the KCM lane. He passed his credential at the reader. The light went green. He walked through. The TSA officer at the lane nodded and waved him on. He boarded his flight to Santo Domingo. The cash, all of it, was now physically inside his roller bag in the overhead bin above row 14, traveling at 35,000 feet over the western Atlantic. The flight took 3 hours and 42 minutes. He worked the cabin. He served drinks. He read the safety briefing in 2 languages. At Las Americas International Airport, he handed the bag to a man at a designated pickup point. The man counted the cash in a hotel room near the airport. Hernandez waited. The man handed him an envelope containing his courier fee. Hernandez folded it into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket and walked back to his crew transport. Every minute of the operation, on both ends, was documented. The cash was tracked. The handoffs were recorded. The undercover communications were preserved. The men he met with in New York and in Santo Domingo were either cooperators or undercover federal agents, and the cash he had moved was federal money that had never been at risk of disappearing into the laundering pipeline. The full operational pattern was now captured on a federal complaint that ran to multiple counts and named him by full legal name, date of birth, residential address, employer, and KCM credential number. The grand jury voted to indict in the spring of 2024. The arrest warrant was signed. The agents waited until they had clean operational conditions, and then they moved. The arrest happened on May 7th, 2024. Federal agents from Homeland Security Investigations, accompanied by officers from the New York Police Department and members of the El Dorado Task Force, executed the warrant at a location in the New York metropolitan area where Hernandez was reachable on a workday morning. He was not in uniform yet. He was carrying a coffee. He was on his way to a shift. The agents identified themselves. They told him they had a federal warrant for his arrest. They told him the charges. They asked him whether he understood what they had just said. He said, "I understand." The lead agent told him to place his hands on the wall in front of him. He did. He was searched. He was handcuffed. The coffee cup was still on the ground next to his right shoe when they walked him to the federal vehicle. He did not resist. He did not argue. He did not ask questions. On the way to the federal building in Lower Manhattan, the agent in the passenger seat turned around and asked him whether he understood why they had come for him today. He said, "I think I do." The agent asked him whether he wanted to speak with the agents at the office about the situation. He said, "I want to speak with an attorney." Those were the last operationally significant words he spoke that day. He was processed at the federal building, fingerprinted, photographed, and held for presentment to a magistrate judge in the Southern District of New York. He was arraigned that afternoon. He entered a not guilty plea through his attorney. Bail conditions were set. He was released later that day under pretrial supervision, his passport surrendered, his KCM credential administratively suspended, and his employment with the airline placed under immediate review. The indictment listed 3 counts. Count 1 charged him with operating an unlicensed money transmitting business under federal statute. Count 2 charged him with entering an airport or aircraft area in violation of security requirements. Count 3 charged him with conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business jointly with co-defendant Sarah Valerio Pujols. The maximum statutory exposure across the 3 counts totaled 20 years in federal prison, plus forfeiture and supervised release. The case was assigned to United States District Judge Ronnie Abrams. The prosecution was led by Assistant United States Attorneys Benjamin A. Gianforti and Jackie Delegati of the SDNY's Illicit Finance and Money Laundering Unit. United States Attorney Damian Williams announced the charges in a public statement that emphasized the structural significance of the conduct. The exploitation of a federal security architecture by a credentialed flight attendant operating a 6-year cash laundering pipeline through a major American international airport. The defense did not contest the underlying conduct. The cooperator's testimony was credible. The sting operation was airtight. The serialized cash was on the record. The dollar volume was documented. The defense strategy was negotiated cooperation, full acceptance of responsibility, and a plea structured around the single count carrying the most favorable sentencing range. Hernandez pleaded guilty on July 25, 2024, before Judge Abrams, to 1 count of operating an unlicensed money-transmitting business. The plea acknowledged the full scope of the conduct, the 6-year duration, the approximately $2.5 million moved, the recruitment of Pujols, the systematic exploitation of the KCM lane. Sentencing was set for November 15, 2024. The sentencing memorandum filed by the government detailed the operational facts. The defense memorandum emphasized Hernandez's cooperation, his immediate acceptance of responsibility, his lack of prior criminal history, his deep family ties in both the United States and the Dominican Republic, and his expression of remorse during his proffer sessions with HSI. The government did not oppose a downward departure from the otherwise applicable guidelines range. The forfeiture was agreed at $121,215, with $61,215 of that joint, and several with Pujols. Judge Abrams imposed the sentence on November 15, 2024. From the bench, she addressed the structural significance of the conduct directly. She said the defendant had been entrusted with a federal security credential that existed precisely because the government and the traveling public extended a presumption of integrity to the men and women who keep American aviation operational. She said that presumption had been weaponized. She said the conduct was sustained, methodical, and conducted with full awareness of its illegality across a 6-year period. But she also said that the defendant had cooperated, had accepted responsibility quickly, had no prior criminal history, and had supported a family on both sides of an international corridor. She imposed 3 months of federal incarceration, followed by 3 years and 9 months of home detention under supervised release. The judgment was entered December 30th, 2024. The surrender date was set for February 24th, 2025. The recommended designation was the Federal Correctional Institution at Danbury, Connecticut, a low-security facility approximately 90 minutes by car from his West New York apartment. Sarah Valerio Pujols was sentenced separately on her own docket by United States District Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald. The 2 other flight attendants in the broader network, Emmanuel Torres and Jarol Fabio, were sentenced on their independent dockets. The aggregate cash moved across all 4 defendants in the same supplier network exceeded $8 million across the operational period. TSA and the participating airlines have, in the period since the case became public, examined additional verification protocols for the known crew member program. The structural tension at the heart of KCM remains. The lane exists because crew members are trusted. The lane works because crew members earn that trust. Charlie Hernandez did not. He surrendered at FCY Danbury as scheduled. He served his 90 days. He returned to his West New York apartment and began the 3 years and 9 months of home detention that completed his sentence. He no longer holds a known crew member credential. He no longer holds employment with an international air carrier. The skyline of Manhattan is still visible from the bluff a block from his apartment. He sees it from his window now, not from a jet bridge. This one was structural, but the case on the right-hand side reaches into a place where the trust was even more sacred, and the betrayal cut deeper. Click it now.